Uh, okay, students, in this class, what we are going to do is we will try to analyze the uh, GS4 ethics paper of UPSC of this year, that is 2025. We will try to understand what was difficulty level of the paper, particularly compared to previous years, as well as section wise, we will go and try to understand how the questions were different and how they can be attempted so that one gets good marks. So now let us start. I will just share the document and then we can further discuss. Uh, Basically, in my opinion, this year's paper was little more, I will say, uh, moderately difficult compared to previous years. See, this year's paper, overall, my impression will be it tested ethical maturity and not just the ethical knowledge. So this is overall impression. Uh, it it was more like a real word case studies. I mean, even in theoretical questions, also a number of questions, situations were given so that you have to think and then reply. So it was not enough to know the theory, but also how those theoretical values operate in personal world and professional world, and how both collide and conflict with each other. That was the perhaps main emphasis in this year's paper. The, in my opinion, it was not simple paper. It had ethical depth and uh, besides deep study, it also required your practical insights into different situations, maybe of personal life, or if you can imagine, of administrative scenarios. So overall, this paper required a student to think like a public servant under pressure and not just an examinee recalling the notes. Basically, if you can imagine this paper, many questions could have been asked in interview also. So this is interview kind of uh, ethics paper, which this year was given in the UPSC. Now we'll go section wise and try to understand how theoretical questions were there, and then how case studies were there. In section A, as you know, theoretical questions will be there. Uh, there will be 6 questions having about 13 sub parts. And here, in my opinion, it was from concept to application. The main emphasis of this theoretical part was it was within the UPSC syllabus, because syllabus itself is, you can say, a very broad kind of syllabus. So you cannot say that anything was outside the syllabus, but each question tested ethical application rather than memorized definitions. So this is important characteristics of this year's paper. Topics like integrity, compassion, attitude, emotional intelligence, objectivity, etc. were asked, but not in isolation. This is very important. The examiner wanted to see whether a candidate could connect these values to the real world dilemmas of governance or not. So that was the main uh, emphasis, you can say, of this year's paper. Uh, One of the most intellectually demanding questions asked was a comparative analysis of ethical worldviews of Gandhi and Aristotle. This was a question there. So this is again a very, very, even though interesting question, but not very direct kind of question. Usually, students will either prepare Gandhi, or some philosophy students may be preparing for Aristotle, or even ethics students also. But then comparison is very, very new thing which was asked, particularly Gandhi and Western philosopher Aristotle. So this was a direct invitation to apply moral philosophy to public service, something rarely tested in earlier years. So this is a new concept which has emerged in this year's paper. Perhaps next year more such comparative questions may be asked. So that is the thing. Other questions demanded that students understand how emotional intelligence shapes ethical attitudes, or how dedication and objectivity are reflected in public life. So that, application of these ethical principles in public life. Now, how an average answer and good answer can be separated? Uh, Perhaps uh, if you add illustration, so not only theory but illustration. So illustrations, real life examples, they will perhaps differentiate between an average answer to good answer. So uh, many examples will be from historical perspective or history. Many examples will be from current administrative perspective, current administrative examples. So all those can be quoted. Uh, Again, referring various ethical theories. This is also even in theoretical question. For example, content deontology, utilitarianism of Mill, or Rawlsian fairness will give the answers a moral architecture. Similarly, Indian thinkers, if you take Ambedkar, constitutional morality of Ambedkar, or even second ARC, or even Gandhi, or even Buddha, or Jaina. So all these different ethical theories or ethical documents, Nolan Committee report, if you are going to quote, you will definitely get better marks than other average students. Now, how it compared, this theoretical portion compared with previous years, let us try to understand that, because I have analyzed last 3-4 years papers. So just I can tell you, 2022 paper was more direct and definitional, allowing high scoring responses even with average conceptual depth. So that paper you can say easy paper compared to this year's. 2023, the shift was to philosophical depth, increased the difficulty, especially with abstract questions on Kant and virtue ethics. 2024 paper returned to practical governance, linked themes like citizen centricity and transparency, etc. But 2025, this year's paper, went one step further by blending emotional intelligence, internal values, and philosophical ethics into each question. Every question felt like a situation, not a static concept. So this is, you can see from 2022 to 2025, in 4 years, how the whole trajectory has developed as far as GS4 ethics paper is concerned. Now, if we go to case studies, section B, case studies, there the main emphasis was emotional and intelligence and institutional ethics. The application of these two, very, very cleverly it was asked. So this year's case studies were the most emotionally grounded and realistic case studies I have seen, because uh, in earlier years, at least you can say that uh, the situations may not be that real, or maybe those situations may not very frequently encountered by public servants or civil servants. But this year's cases, I mean, because I myself have realized in my long career of 32 years that, I mean, several times such kind of situations you encounter. So very, very realistic kind of case studies. They moved beyond classical public administration scenarios into gray zones involving social media, family, child rights, and digital dignity. So all these scenarios were integrated in the case studies. The most talked about case was one of involving your own child being bullied and mocked on social media, followed by the spread of fake narrative against one as a public official. The case was emotionally charged, definitely, legally complex, and ethically layered. It required balancing three roles simultaneously: a parent, a public servant, and a citizen. Other case studies dealt with accountability in fund utilization, building ethical work culture, workplace neutrality, and dilemmas in implementing policy. Each scenario in the case studies had multiple stakeholders. This was very, very important. On the one hand, public was there, colleagues were there, subordinates, media, political leadership, and it required ethical solutions that were both compassionate and administratively sound. So this is again very, very important characteristics of case studies. Now, what made these case studies unique was their demand for balance. You have to respond, but with restraint. Similarly, you have to protect the vulnerable, but follow the procedure. You have to act with empathy, but uphold neutrality. So, you cannot simply write one-dimensional answers. You have to balance your answers. Best responses will show proportionality, emotional intelligence, legal awareness, and institutional sensitivity. So all these have to be integrated in the answers. And if you compare these case studies with earlier years, 2022 paper focused on institutional ethics, RTI use, whistleblowing, conflict of interest, etc. Again, 2023 introduced more theoretical cases, study dilemmas, often invoking classical ethical theories. 2024 paper emphasized administrative culture, budgeting, grievance redressal, and leadership challenges, etc. Now, in 2025, the bar was raised. The case studies demanded moral imagination, ability to invite multiple perspectives, and provide human-centered solutions. So, if you see year-to-year evolution from concepts to conflicts, across the last 4 years papers which I have analyzed, the evolution of ethics paper has followed a clear trajectory. 2022 rewarded candidates who had good coverage of textbook content. 2023 began to test philosophical foundations and deeper value analysis. 2024 emphasized public service values in real governance situations. 2025 combined all these and added emotional realism and personal professional conflict into the mix. So a key shift, if you see in 2025, was the integration of digital ethics, social media misuse, privacy rights, especially involving minors. So this shows that UPSC wants to keep the ethics relevant to current times, and therefore current affairs again become important here. Because a number of case studies, if you see, or a few theoretical questions also were inspired by current affairs. So the inclusion of such themes indicate that current affairs, especially ethically sensitive events like misinformation, AI bias, or institutional corruption, are now feeding directly into case study design. So, what should be done then? So top scoring candidates should follow a few common practices which I have analyzed. What can be those common practices? Let me explain that. First, structured responses. In case studies, consistently follow a logical format: brief context, stakeholders, ethical issues, values involved, options with evaluation, final justified course of action. So, if you see, the questions were also asked like that only. What are the options available to the officer? Or what are the ethical principles involved in the case study? Which option he will select? How he will justify that option? So all these things were asked. Then second is balanced judgment. Avoid emotionally reactive or legally rigid answers. Instead, show balance between legality and empathy, public interest and individual dignity, transparency and discretion. Similarly, use of ethical theories. Frequent use of ethical theories in your answers, theoretical answers, as well as in case studies. So you have to quote Kant and Rawls also, but you have to apply them appropriately. Use Kant's principle of ends in privacy cases. Apply Mill's utilitarianism in fund utilization dilemma. So where it's applicable, Just like that, if you quote, you may not be able to impress the examiner. Another, contextual sensitivity. Respond to the tone of question, understanding when a situation called for restraint, when for assertiveness, and when for collaboration. So accordingly, you have to reply. And then real life examples I have told earlier also. This is very, very important. Now, real life examples can be from history also. Sometimes Gandhi's example may help. Sometimes Ambedkar's example may help. Sometimes some other important personality who has done some ethically correct thing can be quoted. And then current examples of various administrative officers, they are also very, very important. So wherever possible, case studies from governance, you have to bring. Supreme Court judgments, you have to quote wherever important. Recommendations from official reports, for example, second ARC Nolan Committee, you can quote. So what are the key lessons for future aspirants? Maybe you are preparing for 2026, you are preparing for 2027. So what are the important lessons for you? Do not just study values, practice applying them. So while making writing practice, while studying also, preparing notes also, you should have practical issues in mind. So you simply cannot study values in isolation. You have to combine them with practical aspects. Then, for example, learn to ask, what would integrity mean if I am under personal attack? What does empathy mean in a policy failure? Then second point, treat every question as a scenario. Even in section A, do not write philosophical essays. Instead, explain, apply, and illustrate. This is very, very important. Explain, apply, and illustrate. Read current affairs. I've already told this is very, very important, particularly for case studies. Read current affairs thoroughly with ethical lens. There are some ethically important current affair topics. You have to read with that view in mind. So whether it's a social media controversy, a judicial verdict, or an administrative scandal, ask yourself what ethical values are at play. Because that may be your next question in the exam. Prepare moral thinkers with application in mind. Again, I'm telling, moral thinkers you have to quote, ethical theories you have to quote. So accordingly, your preparation should be. So do not just memorize Gandhi or Aristotle. Ask how they would approach a real ethical dilemma. Then focus on tone, structure, and depth. It's very, very important. Write like someone who has both ethical clarity and administrative responsibility. Now, in my opinion, final comments, if you come, it was not a test of this year's exam paper, was not a test of how much you have studied, but actually how deeply you have internalized ethical thinking. The paper challenged your intellect, your emotional balance, and your maturity. It did not seek ideal answers. It sought thoughtful, balanced, and sensitive answers grounded in law, values, and realism. This trend perhaps will be further strengthened in next years. In my opinion, it's going to happen. So future papers will favor those who can blend emotional intelligence with constitutional morality, ethical theory with governance practice, and public service values with human dignity. So basically, if I can say, this year's paper was a very, very landmark kind of paper. And next year, or future exams, this trend is going to be further strengthened or going to continue. So accordingly, our preparation also should be there. And in my classes, definitely I will try to take a hint from this year's paper and try to cover case studies as well as theoretical questions accordingly. So this is what I have to tell in this class, and I'm sure it's useful to the students, particularly who are preparing for next year's exam. So thank you for watching this video. Thanks a lot to everybody.